Dronacharya's very name hints at his unusual, supernatural origin. He was born to the great sage Bharadwaja, one of the 7 great celestial sages, also called the Saptarishis, but not through a traditional womb. His biological father's semen was stored in a clay vessel or drong, from which the infant emerged. Raised in deep poverty but high spiritual privilege, Drong mastered the Vedas, but developed an intense fascination with warfare. Hearing that the legendary warrior avatar, Parshuram, was giving away all his wealth and weapons before retiring to the forest, Drong rushed to his hermitage. By the time Drong arrived, Parshuram had already given away his land and gold. Parshuram offered Drong his only remaining possessions: his physical body and his complete knowledge of celestial, apocalyptic weaponry. Drong eagerly accepted, inheriting the theoretical and practical secrets of every divine weapon or astra known to the gods, including the catastrophic Brahmastra. During his childhood, at his father's ashram, Drong grew up as best friends with Drupad, the prince of the Panchal kingdom. In their youth, an emotional Drupad had promised Drong that when Drupad became king, half of his kingdom and all his wealth will be shared with Drong. Years later, Drong married Kripi, the sister of Kripacharya, and fathered a son named Ashwathama. They were so poor that Drong could not even afford milk for his crying child. He would have to feed his son a mixture of water and flour instead. Heartbroken by his family's starvation, Drong traveled to the court of the now King Drupad, expecting a warm welcome from his old friend. Instead, Drupad mocked him in open court, stating that friendship can only exist between social equals, not between a wealthy king and a begging priest. Thrown out of the palace, a humiliated Drong swore a terrifying vow. He would use his knowledge of warfare to raise an army of students, to conquer Panchal, and strip Drupad of his pride. Drun's opportunity came when he arrived in Hastinapur. He chanced upon the young Pandav and Kaurav princes trying to retrieve a ball that had fallen deep into a dry well. Drong smiled, used a ring of grass blades, shot like arrows to form a chain, and pulled the ball out effortlessly. Stunned by this supernatural feat, the grandfather of the clan, Bhishma, immediately appointed Drong as the royal preceptor for the princes. Drong established his military academy with a strict, singular focus to groom the ultimate warrior who could fulfill his revenge against Drupad. That student was Arjun. Drong suffered from a deep internal conflict. He passionately loved his son, Ashwathama, but he deeply admired the unmatched discipline of his star student, Arjun. To give his son an edge, Drong came up with a subtle strategy. Every morning, he gave all his students water pots with narrow necks to fill at the river. But he gave Ashwathama a wide-mouthed pot. This allowed Ashwathama to fill his pot instantly and rush back to the academy early, to receive private, advanced lessons before the other princes returned. However, Arjun figured out the trick. Using his superhuman speed, Arjun used a specialized arrow to create water funnels, filling his narrow pot just as fast as Ashwathama. Impressed by Arjun's raw genius and work ethic, Drong leaned into his favoritism, ultimately teaching Arjun rare advanced arts, such as the step-by-step methodology to completely recall and disarm a Brahmastra, which he intentionally withheld from his own son. True to his vow, as graduation tuition, or Guru Dakshina, Drong commanded the princes to attack Panchal. Arjun successfully captured Drupad and dragged him to Drun's feet. Drong took half of Drupad's kingdom, keeping his vow. But this act ignited a multi-generational cycle of hatred. In ancient Indian law, or Dharma Shastras, a Brahmin could only take up arms or work for money during times of absolute, life-threatening emergency, or a pad dharma. Drong, however, chose to remain a paid employee of the Kuru crown long after his poverty was cured. Sages throughout the epoch routinely criticized him for selling his sacred knowledge to a corrupt royal court for luxury. Drong also sided with the Kauravas during the Kurukshetra war. On the 13th day of the Kurukshetra war, serving as the supreme commander of the Kaurav army, Drong deployed the Chakravyuha, a deadly, shifting labyrinthine military formation. He knew only Arjun and Krishna knew how to break it, so he purposefully had them lured away. Drong then watched, and actively participated, as 6 veteran Kaurav warriors simultaneously surrounded and brutally slaughtered Arjun's lone, unarmed 16-year-old son, Abhimanyu. This act permanently shattered Drun's moral standing as a righteous teacher. During the Kurukshetra war, the 85-year-old Drong fought like a man possessed. Driven by the duty of his royal salary, he decimated the Pandav ranks for 5 consecutive days. Because he possessed the Brahmastra and could not be defeated by conventional means, Krishna realized that the Pandavas would lose the war unless Drona voluntarily laid down his weapons. Krishna engineered a psychological trap utilizing Drona's absolute vulnerability. His obsessive love for his son, Ashwathama. Bhima killed a massive royal elephant named Ashwathama belonging to the Malava kingdom. The Pandav army began shouting across the battlefield, "Ashwathama is dead! Ashwathama is dead!" Drona approached the fiercely righteous Yudhishthir, a man who had never told a lie. Drona asked if his son was dead. Yudhishthir replied, "Yes, Ashwathama is dead." He then added in a quiet whisper, "The elephant, not the man." But Krishna blew his divine conch shell at that exact millisecond, drowning out the second half of the sentence. Believing his beloved son was dead, Drona lost all will to live. He dropped his bow, sat down on the floor of his chariot, and entered a state of deep, meditative trance called samadhi, to abandon his mortal coil. As his soul was leaving his body, Prince Drishtadyumna, the son of King Drupad, born from a sacrificial fire, specifically destined to kill Drona, ran forward. Ignoring the loud protests of Arjun and the codes of war, Drishtadyumna grabbed the unresisting, meditative master by his hair and severed his head. Dronacharya's biography remains a stark, timeless cautionary tale of how easily supreme knowledge, when bound to personal vengeance and institutional greed, can pave the way to moral decay. Drona's slaughter of common foot soldiers on the battlefield was so uncharacteristically brutal for a Brahmin that it caused a cosmic rift. On the 15th day of the war, just hours before his death, a collective of celestial sages, known as rishis, and ancestors physically manifested invisibly in the sky above his chariot. Led by sages like Vishwamitra and Vasishtha, they openly rebuked him mid-combat. "O Drona, you are a Brahmin meant for peace and scriptures. You have strayed onto the dark path of unparalleled cruelty. You are using celestial weapons to massacre ordinary soldiers who do not know how to counter them. Your time on earth is over. Lay down your arms before you permanently ruin your soul." This divine intervention heavily broke Drona's psychological resolve, making him highly vulnerable to the "Ashwathama is dead" psychological trap engineered by Krishna later that afternoon. One very well-known incident in Hindu mythology is the story of Dronacharya and Eklavya. It is a profound and intensely debated narrative about dedication, social exclusion, and political duty. Eklavya, a young prince of the forest-dwelling, Nishad tribe, desperately wished to master advanced archery but was flatly rejected by Guru Drona, who was bound by state allegiance to exclusively train the royal Kuru princes. Undeterred, Eklavya returned to the deep woods, crafted a clay idol of Drona, and mastered the bow through sheer self-discipline and symbolic devotion to the image of his chosen master. Years later, Drona and his royal pupils discovered Eklavya's jaw-dropping skills, when they stumbled upon a hunting dog, whose mouth Eklavya had harmlessly sealed shut with a rapid-fire burst of arrows guided by sound alone. Realizing that this outsider's prowess completely eclipsed his favorite student Arjun, and fearing the geopolitical threat an independent tribal master archer posed to the state, Drona used Eklavya's unwavering loyalty against him. He demanded the young man's right thumb as Guru Dakshina or tuition. Without a moment of hesitation or bitterness, Eklavya severed his own thumb and laid it at the preceptor's feet. A tragic act of self-sacrifice that neutralized his ultimate military dominance to preserve royal privilege, cementing his legacy as mythology's most tragic yet dedicated disciple. The story of Drona demanding the thumb of the tribal prince Eklavya is widely viewed as an act of pure caste discrimination. While social bias played a massive role, the Sanskrit text reveals a vital political motive. Eklavya was the son of Hiranyadhanus, the commander-in-chief of Jarasandha's army. Jarasandha was the bitter enemy of Hastinapur and the Yadavs, Krishna's clan. Drona realized that if Eklavya became the world's greatest archer, the Kaurav empire would face an unstoppable threat from Jarasandha's faction. In traditional Hindu scriptures, Guru Dronacharya is viewed through a complex, dualistic lens that balances his status as a divinely gifted master of warfare, with the tragic flaws of his worldly attachments. On one hand, texts like the Mahabharat revere him as a partial avatar of the sage Brahaspati, the guru of the gods. Possessing unparalleled mastery of both physical and divine weaponry and epitomizing the ideal of a disciplined, brilliant educator. On the other hand, the scriptures do not shy away from exposing his moral vulnerabilities. His profound love for his son Ashwathama, and his financial dependence on the Hastinapur throne frequently compromised his spiritual detachment, leading him to make morally grey decisions, such as demanding Eklavya's thumb in masterminding the unfair, multi-warrior slaughter of the teenage Abhimanyu. Ultimately, the scriptures portray Dronacharya not as a purely malevolent figure, but as a tragic, duty-bound giant whose ultimate downfall on the Kurukshetra battlefield serves as a sobering Vedic lesson on how even the greatest knowledge and righteousness can be corrupted when chained to ego, nepotism, and political compromise. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe so you can get notified when more videos like this are uploaded.